Welcome to Renegading. The fact that politicians and the mainstream media have to keep reminding us we live in a democracy should be enough to raise suspicions. Broadly, this means that every 4 years we might vote for one arbitrary group of people over another. But could it be that the word and the idea need to be repeated endlessly because people now no longer feel they actually live in a democracy? Joining me to discuss whether we've ever actually lived in a democracy are the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Dr. Gail Bradbrook, and the author and campaigner, Peter MacFadyen. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome. Peter, I don't know why we're making this programme. Democracy is in rude health in the UK. Politicians tell us all the time that this is a democracy, no less a property-owning democracy. Why are we in trouble? Why have you written a book about this? Why are you addressing this democratic problem when there isn't one?
It's kind of like, I don't know where to start when you say that. It's like, I hadn't realised we were on some sort of fantasy show.
This is the first time this programme's ever been called... Well, no, it's been called fantasy a couple of times, but certainly not...
Democracy's in rude health. Wasn't that what you just said?
Yeah.
So,
but the politicians tell us all the time that this is democracy. This is it. This is Mother of Parliaments.
Mother of Parliaments.
We've been doing this for years. We should be acing it by now. And you've come along with flat-pack democracy and told us, actually, we haven't got a democracy.
I'm in such a state of shock now. First of all, you think, or you're suggesting there's a democracy, and also you're listening to politicians and saying that because politicians say something, it must be happening.
Do you think I'm getting this wrong?
I think you're getting this wrong. I have to tell you that I think you're getting it wrong. That a lot of what you're being told is not true, and we definitely don't have a democracy. And personally, I don't think we've ever had one.
Really?
Yeah. There were bits of what the Greeks did, which were heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Their exclusion of women and slaves was problematic, you know. But the way that they were choosing people, so people were randomly chosen, what they said is that voting will always lead to oligarchy.
Right.
So if you choose people by voting, it will always lead to a situation where the rich will manipulate the system and end up screwing the poor.
But so thinking about that and thinking about the Greek idea, that actually what you need is Socratic dialogue, philosopher kings, and people who are experts in their field who genuinely look after the people. Is that the Greek utopia, or is that too simplistic?
I don't know enough about it, but I certainly think that the representative democracy doesn't work. And it hasn't worked for us for years. I can kind of understand, so I live in Frome, near Bath in the west of England. I can kind of understand why in, 17-something, electing your representative, who then got on their horse, went off to Westminster, looked after your interests and then came back, made sense. But for decades it hasn't made sense, and it definitely doesn't make sense now. Because the people know more than the person on the horse. You know, the person who we send off to Westminster has no idea about most of the things that he or she is meant to know about and to represent us with. And there's so much wisdom in society that's then neglected. It's a farce.
And facilitating that wisdom of a crowd, it has total blockage, because what you're saying is that if there is this representative democracy, this person then goes to Westminster, actually they are entrenched and then become part of the problem, and they obviously are not going to solve that problem because they're ultimately benefiting from it. That's as simple as it is.
I think so, yeah. And then political parties, certainly in the Westminster case, exacerbate all that, because that person may not be able to act on behalf, or probably can't act on behalf of the interests of the people they're meant to represent, because they're being told what to do by a tiny number of people.
So they have to toe the party line. Mm-hmm. So then if we keep going with this, it is absolutely logical, is it not, that people are so disenfranchised on the ground when you go back to local constituencies and say, voting, what about that? And they say, please don't do it, it only encourages them.
Yeah, exactly. They're right.
Right. So this is an oligarchy.
Yeah.
Britain is an oligarchy.
Yep.
The United States, advanced oligarchy.
Well, certainly, yes. They've taken some things into new extremes that we haven't quite got to.
And man and woman on the street back in the local areas, legitimately disenfranchised. And that's actually a logical output from this system.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing which I hadn't expected, but I've sort of found, having been involved in this for the last decade, is the extent to which that's true locally as well as in relation to Westminster and the higher levels.
What does that mean? How does that play out?
In the vast majority, it is actually a majority, of even local councils, so towns and parishes, there are not enough people to stand for there to be elections. So if there are 12 seats in a council, you can't get 12 people to stand because they haven't got any power, they're so disillusioned with the whole thing. So it's all crumbling from that level up. And I would say that in a way that didn't matter again some years ago, but it does matter now, primarily because of austerity. If we don't do it, no one will. So again, where I come from, we used to get money for things from counties and districts. That money and services came down. They don't exist anymore. They haven't existed for a decade because that money's not come from central government. So if we don't do anything about housing, about mental health, about the arts, it ain't going to happen. So unless you've got a group of people who are coherently doing that and, crucially, are working with their community, it's a complete disaster.
And that void that's left, it's clear what happens, but really what you're talking about is an interregnum, because this old system is dying, and what you're talking about with flat-pack democracy is making sure that those local groups are vital, energised and organised.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're stuck between those two systems. The old's dying, the new can't quite be born.
There were problems with the old anyway. I think it didn't work for other reasons, particularly around well-being and around society. So it's yet another thing because it's taking power. If everything's coming down from above, why do you get involved? Why do you make decisions? Why be part of your community? And what we know now is that that's crucial for well-being and people's mental health.
Meaning and purpose, really.
Yeah, exactly. So because you're taken out of the system, that doesn't help. But yeah, I think it's absolutely true that we need to have that stuff. You notice it most with things like go to anywhere in rural Britain and try and find a toilet. They don't exist,
Like a public loo.
Like a public toilet. I mean, it's probably true in London and cities as well to a large extent. But things like that don't exist because the money's not coming from above to run them. And locally, people aren't engaged with trying to find other ways of providing the basic things that you need.
Right, which means you go and hunt for a McDonald's.
Yeah, you go and hope for McDonald's and hope you get into it. Or in our case, what we've done is to create a whole network of community toilets so that you can go on the app, find out where they are, and they're cafes and other businesses who are happy for you to come and use their facilities.
People might laugh at the loo example, the toilet example, but actually what you're saying is if you can't get that right, which is something so fundamental and basic, you can't begin to get any of the other stuff right.
And be a parent with a young child or somebody elderly.
Right.
And it becomes why you go to a town. It becomes absolutely crucial in your life, doesn't it? I mean, you're right. You could regard it as slightly facetious, but actually it's a good way of illustrating the extent to which basic things are not being provided.
Gail, Britain, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, is a country, just by the sounds of it, that is too small now to play really on the big stage, but then too big to look after its own people. So we're back to interregnum. We don't really know where to place ourselves. Is that a fair depiction?
Well, I think given that sort of 15% of financing of fossil fuels comes from the UK and we are the world's biggest tax haven network, I think we're still quite a big player, actually. And what we do matters in the world and what signals we send out. And we have just birthed a new social movement from the UK, so we've obviously able to do something. I love this country, actually.
What Peter's saying is that whether we love it or not, we don't really have a functioning democracy here. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I put a blog together once called 15 Ways to Fake a Democracy, and then we made a little film that involved faking orgasms outside Parliament, which was quite good fun.
But we're faking a democracy.
Yeah, it's faking it. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? You can have a dictatorship where it's really blatant, where people get murdered in a really obvious way, or you can, the British government's killing 26 people a day with its policies on air pollution. It's been found guilty 3 times. There's no punishment, is there? That's not any kind of functioning thing. We know all the stuff that Cambridge Analytica got up to, overspending on elections. There's, lists of things that are wrong with it.
Do you find it ironic, though, that we can't get democracy right in this country, but we are very quick to believe politicians who are willing to go and visit democracy on other bits of the world?
It's the height of arrogance, isn't it? To say the least, as well as violence.
And that arrogant state of mind, is that because we still think, well, the powers that be, whoever they are, still think that we own India?
Well, it's a fake process anyway. It's just a colonialist mentality, and the real rationale is to get hold of people's resources, as far as I understand it. A lot of foreign direct investment goes through the sort of whole tax haven economy as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's not based on care, it's not based on humanity.
When you make those sort of statements, what often you come up against are these right-wing types who are, quote, pragmatists. And they say, well, listen, you can talk about your care, care, and you can talk about love, and you can talk about all these principles, but actually we're doing democracy and we're getting things done, and you can almost hear the rhetoric. I know, it is...
They're killing life on Earth, you know. The latest science from the IPCC this September is that the methane class rates are now melting, and at least 20-25% are going to go, whatever, and up to 70%. And that's very close to the mechanism of the Permian mass extinction, when 97% of all life died. So, like, generalists that look across the science say there are sort of three scenarios, almost inevitable, the collapse of our civilization quite soon due to food price hikes. And it's already happening this year, aren't the food's rotting in the fields. Last year, Latvia and Lithuania had national emergencies and so on. You only need that in a multi-breadbasket situation. That's what the academics call it. And Anglia Ruskin University gave till 2040 for that to happen. NASA Goddard last year said it would be sooner. Second scenario is mass death, and third one is human extinction. Like, so if they're getting stuff done, they need to question what they're doing. I actually often say to people, one of my favourite videos is Milton Friedman talking about the wonders of neoliberalism and the market system and making all this stuff, getting things done. And at the end of it, he said, because of the market system, no power will be concentrated and therefore no harm will be done. Which is a great... I think that's brilliant.
It's a good idea.
It's a brilliant... If that's his vision,
yeah.
If we could design a democratic economics legal system that had that as a goal, let's do it, you know. Me and Milton are aligned.
Gosh, we didn't think we'd ever hear that on this programme.
If that's what he thinks.
The backdrop to what you're talking about is this level of catastrophe. We talk about not being able to provide the absolute basics and local democracy being a sham, frankly. Don't you think it's ironic that the Houses of Parliament, if you were to try and explain, for instance, the Extinction Rebellion case and explain the science behind it, that you don't actually have audio-visual ability within that chamber to show people graphs? Is that not another aspect of having to use words to explain to an opposition party and not actually show them a graph? I mean, isn't it ironic that we're in this digital age and we can't show people in dynamic terms what's really happening to the planet?
Extraordinary, isn't it? But then that whole house and the whole of what it does is based in some other century, just as I would argue that permeates all the way down, so that at this lowest level that I'm talking about of towns and parishes is the same kind of thing. So the way that, you know, Prime Minister's question time is that whole arguing with each other nonsense. But again, it's not very different. If you come to any town council and it's sort of a lot of people all sitting around, well, it won't be a lot of people. There'll be a row of councillors in their suits. I mean, they will have come in, all rise for the mayor. There'll be prayers to start with. You know, that's nice for the Muslim. You know, it's kind of like, what are we doing? And we're still based in these situations. I think it is in a fantasy, thinking that we live in this democracy that's working. It doesn't function. It doesn't function at any level. People aren't engaged.
Sometimes it's nice to own something real that you can hold in your hand and one day pass on to your loved ones. This free guide from Direct Bullion told me everything I needed to know so I could start my own collection of gold coins and bullion bars. For your free Direct Bullion guide to buying gold, call 0800 055 7050. One of the things I like about Direct Bullion is you can start your collection for as little as £50. All the gold they sell is VAT-free. Their specialists are on hand to guide and support their customers. And if the time comes, Direct Bullion will even buy your gold back. That's why they're a top recommended precious metals dealer by the Spears 500. For your free Direct Bullion guide to buying gold, call 0800 055 7050. That's 0800 055 7050. Start your collection today.
This is a sticker from a water bottle found in the stomach of a fish. The brand is part of the Coca-Cola company, which sells millions of bottles of soda every day.
The idea was that let's tell consumers they're the bad ones, they're the litter bugs, they're throwing this away. Industry shouldn't be blamed for all of this waste.
The company has long promised to reuse the plastic.
On a un document en fait, des traces écrites de Coca qui nous explique dans un échange de mails que en fait c'est uniquement 7% de plastique recyclé contenu en moyenne dans les bouteilles au niveau mondial. Et sachant que l'objectif en 2015 était 25%.
Aujourd'hui, on a une nouvelle stratégie et une nouvelle politique.
But for now, the mountains of waste only grow higher.
Welcome back to Renegade Inc. Before we talk more about whether or not we've ever actually lived in a democracy with Dr. Gail Bradbrook and Peter MacFadyen, let's have a look at what you've been tweeting about in this week's Renegade Inc. Index. First up, we've got a tweet from Amreen Nazaran Rajavi. Mainstream media love to celebrate the Hong Kong protests as acts of democracy, but are silent about the Gilets jaunes protests. Gilets jaunes protests are still going on in France for almost a year now.
Yeah, they should cover it. It's happening, right? That's the job of the media, isn't it, to cover things. It's not to control what people know about.
Next from M. Doppio, there's a danger in France of reducing democracy to a small political game where only those who want to be elected are playing and the people are watching. The Gilets jaunes have again put this huge majority of people at the front of the stage. And this, Peters, back to your first half point, which is actually democracy now is the best that money can buy.
Which democracy?
Well, the one that is claimed by the political class, this democracy. You just don't recognise it,
No, I don't. The vast majority of people are not engaged at all, are just simply not involved. So how can that be a democracy? Whether democracy should be all about feeding in, everyone being engaged and feeding into making decisions, including those younger than 18. What's that all about?
Next, from Michael Sexton, from an Axios article, the race to fill local newsrooms. The death of local news in America is routinely cited as one of the country's biggest threats to democracy. Gail, this is really important. It's, again, the media. If you're not operating at that level and not talking about local issues, how possibly can you get it right at the national level?
Well, I mean, it's market principles apply to local media. It's just the media needs to be paid for. It's the fourth estate, isn't it? It needs to be well-resourced and people need to be involved in telling their own stories.
Finally, from Richard Jones, great decision. I don't want the general public to be inconvenienced, but this is democracy in action, fighting against wrong systems. And this is a response to the article in the independent newspaper, Extinction, Rebellion, Prosecutions Dropped en masse after High Court rules London protest ban unlawful. Is that a glimmer of hope? Are you happy with that?
Absolutely, I'm happy with it. It was clearly wrong, the original way that was handled, and it's great to see. But there is a judiciary that lives outside the system, which still has some power, or seems to.
Our book of the week this week, Flat Pack Democracy. This is 2.0, version 2.0. Peter, pitch it to us.
The first one, Flat Pack Democracy, I was invited to write up the story of Froome's politics, which was basically how can a small group of people take over a town council without using party politics? So how can they do this in a completely different way? So I wrote that up about 5 years ago, and then this is 2.0 is So What Happened? So it covers not only Froome, but other towns in Britain as well, who have taken that model to take power themselves and start running things in ways that I think are hugely successful. It's an incredibly important model.
Flat Pack Democracy 2.0, we recommend
Thanks.
it. When we were in New York, we talked to Ashley Sanders about Extinction Rebellion and also her view on how it is, in a sense, revitalising democracy.
Extinction Rebellion, I think, takes some of the best lessons we've learned from the history of mass protest and also the history of just good old, grassroots, very localized, campaign-based organizing. And I think one of the kind of genius elements of it is it's an international rebellion. It's calling for rebellion. So it's calling not for people just to work on a single campaign or issue, but to see themselves as part of a worldwide movement that rebels against the forces that bring death and destruction and possibly extinction to animals and to the human race. But it also allows people meaningful ways to participate in their actual neighborhoods and cities. And so Extinction Rebellion has a very decentralized motto. You basically, if you agree with Extinction Rebellion's basic beliefs, which is that we need to tell the truth and that this is an emergency and we need to act like one, that we need to rapidly draw down fossil fuels in the next 10 years to net zero, and that we need to think about climate justice and repairing the ways that minority communities have been harmed most by environmental destruction, then you're part of Extinction Rebellion. And you can join a group that exists, you can start a group, or you can start doing small, targeted, creative actions. And I think that frees people up to, Extinction Rebellion talks a lot about the fact that people know that things are wrong, but since they don't see anybody in government acting like the crisis is the crisis that it is, they kind of lull themselves into a feeling of like, well, what can I do? And I guess it's not that big of a problem. But when you see people doing these really bold, creative, disruptive actions, you see A, that this is a crisis, B, that there are people doing things about it, and C, that's not that hard. You don't need like a master's in stopping climate change. You can join the movement right now.
The greatest battle, the greatest conflict, if you like, is staring at us now, and that is us human beings protecting our environment. How do you mobilise people, and you've done an amazing job so far, Extinction Rebellion, how do you mobilise people to have them understand that the battle you're fighting is in their best interest?
Well, you just tell them the science in a meaningful way, and people get it. And I think a lot of people have known for many years that there's an issue. Not only is it not changing, I mean, carbon emissions have been going up. I think they went up 2.7% last year. So people know. I think the main thing actually was to give people permission, in a way, to feel it and to put grief at the heart of what Extinction Rebellion's about, to say to people, this hurts, and we love life on Earth. And when you actually grieve for what's happening, you feel heartbroken. It's really discombobulating, actually. And it's quite a transformative, initiatory process. And that's what's mobilised people, are the tears. I think about the issues that we're facing on different layers. So there's obviously systemic issues with democracy, with the economy, with the media.
But you're transcending those, in a sense.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So there's cultural issues as well, aren't we? These things don't have a purpose. They don't have a healthy purpose at their heart. But underneath that is the patriarchy, or whatever word you want to use for it. But it's this mindset of scarcity, separation and powerlessness. And it requires sitting in vulnerability and mourning for what we've been losing, and feeling togetherness and those kinds of things. And I think, for me, the way we've done the rebellion is or possibly more important than the rebellion itself, because that may or may not work. It's like a mechanical process. You get people on the streets, you overwhelm the state, you get the coverage and so on. It's all in the theory and it makes sense. But there's another piece where people are doing people's assemblies on the streets, and actually you have to be in agreement with our 10 principles and values, which includes things like having a regenerative culture, so how we look after each other. And I think people have had the experience on the streets of London, hopefully in other places, of what it would be like to live in community. When we took over Waterloo Bridge and ate together and sang together, it was a really beautiful experience. So I think all those things are helping to mobilise this movement. And the way I say it is we've got to shift the paradigm. And so the only way I can see it is that you have to work on 4 layers. I mean, the 4th layer is, for me, a spiritual piece about something bigger, and there's a connection to something divine or sacred or love, if you want to be atheist about it. And if you can embody all of that, working systemically, working on the culture, working on the patriarchal wounds and the traumas and reconnecting, then we can make the shift. And you don't need everybody to do it. We know this from the sort of consciousness shifts that happen.
What Gail's saying is dedicating yourself to a cause greater than yourself ultimately gives meaning and purpose. And what you're saying at local level is no one's really dedicating themselves to the health of democracy, because what we've had is an incredibly individualistic society since Thatcher, and actually you can't serve yourself and something else at the same time.
Absolutely. And we need to bring people in. There's a huge overlap between what Extinction Rebellion has done and where it came from and its roots and its whole methodologies to what we've been trying to do at a local level, I think. And it was no surprise to me that the ways of working that bind together what we've done in Frome overlap very much with the principles of what the ways that underpin everything that Extinction Rebellion's doing. So I work as an undertaker with the other hats on. That's what I do in the day. And one of the other things that we get wrong and we've lost to the Victorian era is an ability to grieve. Someone asked me the other day, how often do you see somebody really crying, really upset? I was thinking about it, and very rarely is the answer. in our society, we don't have that. But a good funeral leaves you afterwards feeling uplifted and confident and able to move on, and it's part of a process. And I think it's incredibly important. The grieving and the real engagement and the tears within Extinction Rebellion is really, really important. We need to be able to grieve what's being lost, and animals and species are being lost daily at vast rates. We need to be able to properly engage with that. Our politicians definitely don't. You know, I mean, they know the facts, as you were saying before, even if they had a graph, but they're not really engaging in any visceral way with that, I don't think. They're seeing the facts, if you like, but it's with the head, not with the heart.
I think it's also important to say, like, culturally, we have a system that is deeply narcissistic, the consumer sort of capitalist culture. It's all about me and now and what do I need. And it's mostly about feeding the addictions and the wounds and the things that just make you feel a bit better with all the stress. But in other healthy cultures, they have a real sense of ancestor and a sense of the next 7 generations. And you're in this flow of life and you're just going to be here for a while. And when you're gone, you'll be honoured for what you did. And you think about what's coming for your children and you're serving that. And we don't have that in our culture as part of that process of thinking about death and dying. It's very liberating. There's early onset dementia in my family, so that's over my head potentially. And I find it liberating to think I might die soon, genuinely, because it's about now, isn't it? It's about what you're doing now, not about, I've got to live as long as possible and have as much stuff as possible. It's not enjoyable, that way of being, is it?
So where from here, when we think about Extinction Rebellion, for people watching this, what is the one thing that they can start thinking about or start to do which ultimately gets them on the right side of history?
Well, we've got groups across the world. We're in 72 countries. There's about 700 groups that people could join or start their own. There's lots of support if you want to start an XR group. You don't have to be the person getting arrested. You're just in support of civil disobedience.
And what do you say to those people who see some of the groups and think, actually, it's silly, someone dressed as broccoli, you know, on a banana phone, on a chat show? Like, because there is a lot of people who get put off by that.
I mean, to be honest, that's Animal Rebellion, and they're a sister organisation, but they're not us.
Do you notice you shifted the blame to That's wait,
I mean, we did more stupid things than that, to be fair. So mistakes are going to get made. Sometimes delivery won't be perfect. And either we learn from it and we grow, or we fold in on ourselves. I think it is a crucial moment right now, because to be a good decentralised network, we need 5 systems working really well. It's to do with finance and sharing information and feedback and other things like that, so conflict and stuff. And a lot of getting that right is prefiguring what we do when collapse happens. You know, so how you resist eco-fascism. So it's worth doing. We're entering the darkness of winter, and I think it's time to kind of rest. Well, I'm talking from a UK perspective. It's time to get some rest in and then get back out on the streets. And we're thinking about doing a debt strike next year to really focus on the economic side of the issues.
Fantastic. And from a flat-pack democracy side of things, how do we now re-engage to begin to make vital again the smallest but most important bits of our community?
So there's a massive overlap, actually. Frome, isn't really no surprise to you, has a thriving Extinction Rebellion group, and busloads of people went from there to London during rebellions. And to me, it's the same kind of things. It's getting involved. It's really taking control back. There's elections in May. There will be in many towns and villages throughout the country, and there's a real opportunity now to actually go, we could take control of the communities that we live in and make them work better. And absolutely central to that will be declaring climate emergencies and linking to Extinction Rebellion and working from those grassroots up.
We do need a vision that's uplifting, even whilst being realistic. And there's a lot in the world that already speaks to that, like Tikkun Olam in the Jewish faith or Ubuntu. It's about stopping the harm and repairing it.
Renaissance possible?
I think we have to birth something new, and we don't know what it looks like yet, but there's a lot of clues out there, and Flatpack's part of it.
Gail, Peter, thank you both very much. That's it from Renegading this week. You can drop the team a mail, studio@renegading.com, or you can tweet us @Renegading. Join us next week for more insight from those people who are thinking differently. But until then, stay curious.